All right, now we're back with our usual segment. It's called Value Plays. We're here with Eric Brown from 5reasonsrealtor.com, 5reasonsrealtor.com. That's the best way to find him. We'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go forward. He's the official realtor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, but he's also a huge Heat fan, been a long-time season ticket holder, and he joins me weekly here to discuss value as it comes to transactions, the Heat, the NBA, and everything else along those lines. Usually throw some things at me that he forces me to actually answer questions, which I always enjoy, and I usually get wrong. Eric, start.
Let's talk about the trade deadline real quickly. 3 transactions, basically of players that were of providing no or little value to the Heat for players that hopefully will provide some value. Silva and Harkless for Bielitsa, which hopefully that's going to work out, give us some three-point shooting. Olynyk and Bradley and the pick swap. For which amounts to basically a low-cost look at Victor Oladipo, who hopefully can restore some of his or regain some of his lost performance as an all-star, but at the bare minimum is going to provide an upgrade as a perimeter defender, which the Heat sorely need. And then lastly, the Heat unloaded a hate-spewing anti-Semite for a guy who hasn't played in a year, and anytime you can do that, that's a win for the Heat as well. So 3 trades, all 3 had positive value for the Heat. However, on closer inspection, I think we have to realize that our entire offseason just went out the door. All 3 of those guys, which were described as having very little value, just went out the door. And as a result, I want to save you and Alex and Greg some time. You don't have to reconvene. I'm going to give you the grade for the offseason for the front office, F, without question. That's an F. And also, it's left us with plugging in, as I just mentioned, a guy who hasn't played in a year, Trevor Ariza, as the 4. And we're rummaging around up at Sawgrass at the outlet stores, looking in the discount buyout bin for a 5, a backup 5 for Bam, who we needed. It was obvious that we needed last year when we were in the bubble. So I want to know, how do you defend that, and what are we going to do about it going forward?
Well, first, I want to defend the outlet stores. You can get a pretty good deal at Nordstrom, probably better than Dwayne Dedman. I can't really defend the offseason except to say this. And look, in terms of production, I would probably say D minus, just because Precious has given them something, and that's a first-round pick that they used. And we know he's struggling, but there is some value there long term. They didn't get anything out of Harkless and Bradley. Harkless, was a clear miss. Bradley more so because of the injuries and COVID. So there's some extenuating circumstances there. The only reason I give them a little bit of a pass on it, not a complete pass, but a little bit of a pass, is because they did try to do other things. I mean, they did believe they had Marcus Morris. That didn't end up working out. Their reasoning for not signing Crowder, I understood, because they were in for Giannis. And I think, obviously if they knew what they know now, that Giannis was going to re-sign, they would have handled the offseason differently. I'm not saying they made the best choices, but I also want to go back and think at the time, splitting the mid-level exception on 1-year deals between Avery Bradley, who has been a productive player, he was going to solve the point of attack problems. He played well last year for the Lakers before he opted out of the bubble. And Mo Harkless, who's been a functional guy that they liked before. I don't think their expectations there were particularly high, but they did start him in the first game of the season. So they were expecting some contribution. I think when you look at that, I couch it a little bit. With that being said, I then pivot and say a lot of organizations sit on their mistakes. The Heat typically do not. And they have at times made mistakes by overpaying guys. And, I don't want to relive 2016 and 2017. But for the most part, when they make a mistake, they get off of it. They're not proud about it. And so I want to give them some credit for at least acknowledging, look, Silva was a project they put some time into, but really wasn't going to develop into much. Harkless was a bust. I mean, let's just acknowledge it. Bradley wasn't giving them what they expected. And they get off of all of those 3 guys. You mentioned the Myers situation, which looking back now, and at the time, it looked like a mistake to give him $9 million, but I don't really think that kept them from doing anything else. Like, people look at him or Crowder as an either or. It really wasn't. They offered Jay $14 million for 1 year. I mean, that's a pretty reasonable contract. So I'm not going to – and they also – what gets forgotten is they did re-sign Dragic. Now, I know that Goran has not had the kind of season, and it looks like he's lost a step or at least some explosiveness. He hasn't had the kind of season they expected. But at the time, re-signing Goran was not a foregone conclusion, and they got him, at a reasonable rate that should allow them to at least be able to get him for cheaper going forward if they want to. So, Eric, I'm with you. The offseason was not one of their better off seasons, but I will say this. It's not as bad as the 2016 and 2017 off seasons when they lost their franchise player in Dwayne Wade, created bad blood, overpaid James Johnson, Hassan Whiteside, and Dion Waiters, all of whom they had to try to get rid of later on. And Kelly Olynyk they brought in, who was fine, but I mean, he was fine. I mean, he's the one. And Tyler Johnson too, who they overpaid. So this is not their worst offseason, not their best. I'd say D.
Using that Johns Hopkins grading scale.
No. Well, at Hopkins, that would be an F-. Trust me, I would have no chance of even getting back in the classroom.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about was there was an article that Kirk Goldsberry dropped on ESPN.com a couple of weeks ago entitled Coastal Elite Status of the NBA Superstars and Super Teams. And really what it describes as a result of player empowerment, that superstars are moving primarily to coastal cities, namely New York and Los Angeles. And as background in the story, he mentions that between 1969 and 2010, only 7 of 41 finals MVPs won the award after changing teams. But since 2010, 8 of the 10 that have won the award after they changed teams. And also currently, there's only 17 active players who have been named first team All-NBA at least once in their career. And if you add in Steph Curry in San Francisco, so you have 5 teams, that would only leave another 7 players spread out amongst the rest of the 25 teams in the league that have players on their rosters that were named first team All-NBA at least one in their career. And he also details, which I found very interesting, and I think it has ramifications for the Heat, that the way draft picks are now valued are very different. If you're one of the coastal elite teams, you don't value draft picks for keeping them and developing the players. You're using them to buy players from other teams, like what the Brooklyn did with James Harden. Here, take our picks. We're just going to extract your superstar, from your team. Whereas the teams that are not these elite teams, they're valuing the picks more than ever before, because that's their only way of developing a potential superstar is to, organically to homegrown that and player development. So it's created these like 2 different NBA teams, 2 different NBAs and 2 different worlds. So my question to you is, what classification do you think that the Heat are in? Are they these quote coastal elite teams or not? And what are they doing to attract superstars, and what could they do better? Because right now we don't have a player on our roster that was a first team All-NBA player. I guess the last would have been Wade or LeBron. I don't even remember if Wade made first team. Certainly LeBron did.
Yeah, no, Wade didn't during the Big Three era. I think he may have in 2008, 2009, I believe was probably the last time. I'd have to look that up. Well, first thing, I mean, I thought the article is interesting. I mean, all you have to do is look at New Orleans and Oklahoma City, right? Like, these are not coastal elite teams, and they're hoarding draft picks. Well, why are they hoarding draft picks? Because they can't get free agents. So essentially they're trying to, in the same way that, players like Zion and Durant and Westbrook and Harden have been drafted to those places, they're going to try either to draft that player again, or more likely, once they have a core of at least 2 or 3 of those guys, and in the case of New Orleans, they seem to have 2 with Ingram and Zion, and I think they've got 1 with SGA, with OKC. Once they have a core of star level type players, then they're going to flip those draft picks to bring the stars in. Similarly to the way OKC brought in Paul George, they'll probably make trades like that again. So I do think that trend exists, but I don't think the Heat should be afraid of that trend. I mean, the reality is, for years and years and years, players picked Miami over New York. And for a while, they didn't pick LA either. It's only after LeBron finally agreed to go there. But we kept talking about how nobody wanted to play for the Lakers. Remember Marcus Aldridge, a conversation we were having this week? LaMarcus spurned the Lakers. Remember, he was supposed to go to the Lakers. He ended up going to San Antonio. I tried to remind people of that this week. So he didn't want a meeting with the Lakers. So I don't think it's permanent. I think there are about 7 or 8 franchises that are more attractive than others. Interestingly, a couple of the elite franchises historically, which I think you could look at the Bulls and the Celtics in particular, have not been able to attract free agents. I can't remember the last attractive free agent who went to Chicago or even to Boston, for that matter.
Doesn't that have more to do with the lifestyle, particularly in the case of Boston?
It does, but that's my point. How many other franchises in the league are more attractive than Miami? Boston is not, Chicago is not, and those are 2 of the biggest cities. Toronto is a great city. It's not more attractive than Miami. Atlanta is not more. Atlanta's had a lot of difficulty attracting free agents. I have a theory on that. A lot of players like to party in Atlanta. They don't want to live in Atlanta for the same reason, actually. The attractive franchises, Dallas is considered a somewhat attractive franchise for a while. Mark Cuban has had a hell of a time attracting free agents. Houston's done okay with it. But again, this is my point. I don't think I read Kirk's story, but I don't think it's something to be afraid of for the Heat. They're still attractive. When they haven't been able to get guys, it hasn't been because they didn't want to play for Riley or didn't want to play in the Sun or didn't want the no state tax. It was basically because the Heat didn't have the money or didn't have the core. Durant would have come, but his choice was playing with an aging Dwayne Wade, who they hadn't even re-signed, or going out to play with the greatest team of all time, or one of them, in Golden State. So, that's an easy choice. Gordon Hayward went to play for his college coach, and to be honest, the Heat dodged a bullet there. So, and look, the Heat got Jimmy Butler, who may not be first team All NBA, but he's a top 10, top 15 player in the league. And they got him with no cap space. And Victor Oladipo just begged his way to play here. And Bradley Beal, if he goes anywhere else other than Washington, it'll be Miami. So I don't think there's any narrative that would say, look, the Lakers are the Lakers. And if they have star players, they're going to attract players. But even like I said, they didn't for years. And it's a very short list. Players going to play for the Clippers. Kawhi's a weird dude, man. Paul George wanted to be in LA and Kawhi's from there. But I really don't think this is a concern. I think there are some sleeping giants in the NBA. I think Phoenix has been a sleeping giant for a long time. A lot of players, particularly older players, they like the climate. They like the golf. It's just been a bad organization. I think Orlando is another one we've seen has been able to attract some free agents over time. Going all the way back to Grant Hill and Tracy McGrady. But I don't think the Heat are banging on the window out in the cold on this one. I think they're fine. They just need the cap space. That's what they need. If they have the cap space, sometimes they don't even need the cap space. They need to create favorable conditions. And I think now they have a player in Bam who's attractive enough that they should be able to get guys to come.
Ethan, I actually agree with you. I think that really that the Heat should be in that group of 4 or 5 or 6 because of the lifestyle in South Florida, because of no state tax. And right now, we haven't gotten there. So part of what I'm kind of hinting at is we should have cap space and we should have draft picks. And I think this discounting of draft picks has to stop. Even this trade, if you look at that trade in a vacuum where they gave up the pick swap in 22, that itself kind of devalued the 22 pick, because that's in all probability going to be Brooklyn's pick, and barring a disaster with Brooklyn, that's going to be a swap. And that I'm kind of concerned that we're not valuing draft picks. We should have cap space, and we should have draft picks, and we should align ourselves and consider ourselves, position ourselves as one of these quote coastal elite unquote, and be able to go out and get more players than we've got.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, and that's why I was so against what happened in 2016 and 2017, because I kept saying the Heat took themselves out of the room, which they should never do. They should always leave that door ajar, no matter what the circumstances, and I believe that they've done that in this case. Now, the draft picks, another conversation, but related. I mean, that's more to do with trades, and they didn't have the capital to get Harden. I mean, no matter what anybody says, they couldn't even get in the room for that conversation.
Exactly the point. That's exactly.
They didn't have what Houston won. I'm with you on it, but I do think they've remedied the cap space situation. The pick situation takes a little bit longer, and that is probably not something that's going to remedy completely until Riley is gone. All right, you got one more for me.
Yeah,
and
I want to ask you. Now that we've got Oladipo, I'm really curious what you think. If Oladipo comes in and performs fairly well, he doesn't have to be super all-star, but let's just say he puts up 46, 36, 75% free throw line, say 18 points a game. Would you rather re-sign him and try to sign and trade, assuming we could sign and trade for Kyle Lowry? Let's say you got $50 million between the two of those guys. And that would mean probably hanging on to Tyler. You'd probably have to sign and trade Duncan and then include Dragic or Iggy. Or would you rather trade Hero and Goran and Iggy and possibly Duncan and whatever picks and swaps we got left and get Bradley Beal? And does either of those get you into real serious title consideration?
I'll answer this question very short. I think you do what you can do to get Bradley Beal. I think he's a generational scorer who just needs to be unleashed on the right team. And I also think he fits their culture. And I think that his defense would improve, maybe not to the level that Oladipo has gotten to over the course of his career, but Bradley's been a pretty good defender. I think that the culture in Washington has been detrimental for that. To me, any team that starts with, and again, Bradley Beal is younger than James Harden, which is why this is a different conversation for me. Any team that starts with Bam, Jimmy, and Bradley Beal, let the Heat figure the rest of that out. Plus, remember that probably to bring Beal in, you're going to be probably moving guys like Robinson in particular, who you may not want to pay anyway. So if you're going to reallocate that space, I would reallocate it to Bradley Beal. I will say this as we close. I saw Bradley Beal's video where he was talking to some players on his AAU team the other day. I'm incredibly impressed with Bradley Beal. I just think that, to me, he's the guy.
I saw that video. It was impressive. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, to me, he's the heir to Dwayne. If they could get him, I think Oladipo is a good stopgap. I think it's fine if they, if Depot has a good 2-3 months here and they feel like he's bought in and that the money won't change him. I feel like he wants to be here and Jimmy's comfortable with him, which is a big part of this. I know Jimmy's comfortable with Beal. I'm not sure about Oladipo. I think it then makes sense to take a look at, paying Oladipo, not the max, but something, reasonably in the vicinity. But to me, Bradley Beal he's the guy for me, and he's been the guy for me and to be honest, he's been the guy for them other than Giannis, and he fits better than Giannis does with Bam and Jimmy anyway. All right, where do people find you, and how can you help them?
5reasonsrealtor.com. I can help them with purchasing a house, selling a house, just advice. If they have a real estate problem, they can contact me through the website. All my contact information is there.
So go to 5reasonsrealtor.com. Eric, we'll be back next week. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.